We do a great job at detecting and responding. We don't do such a good job at preparing and preventing. So I think this is really about preventative security as you go forward. I think that's what we as an industry are missing.
This is Code and Country with host Ian L. Patterson.
Welcome to Code and Country. I'm Ian L. Patterson, your host. Today's guest has defended Wall Street, advised the Pentagon, and shaped the cyber playbook for the US Intelligence Community. Patrick Gorman was previously the CISO at Bank of America, CSO, Chief Security Officer at Bridgewater, one of the world's largest hedge funds, and CIO for the US Intelligence Community. Currently serves as CEO and co-founder of Cybric AI, an enterprise cybersecurity posture management startup. And Patrick, you've also been a good friend to the company. So it's good to have you here and looking forward to the conversation.
Well, I'm looking forward to visiting you in Canada.
There we go. Open invitation. Maybe to start off with, could you actually walk us through your career journey and what pulled you into the world of Intel, cyber, and national security?
Thank you for listening to Code and Country, sponsored by Plurilock. If you're enjoying this episode, please remember to like, subscribe, or follow the podcast. And now, back to the episode.
Yeah, so I think like a lot of people that enter cyber, at least in the United States, we really entered it through the military because when I came in, it wasn't really called cyber. It was called signals intelligence. And so after, just to give you a little bit of context, and probably will show you my age as well, when the Soviets shot down Ep.11, the Korean jet airliner over Sakhalin Island back in 1984, I read in New York Times about what the U.S. military was doing in signals intelligence, and I found it fascinating. So I went down, didn't know anything about the military, went down and signed up, and about a year later, I was going through Defense Language Institute to study Russian. But I was really in what they call in the U.S. at the time, signals intelligence. And basically, I spent 12 years of my life doing signals intelligence, electronic warfare, and psychological operations. So that was kind of a precursor to cyber. And so by the early 1990s, when the U.S. Intel community started kind of rethinking how we fought wars, cyber became kind of the buzzword. We called it information assurance back there, information security, but it really evolved into what is now cyber. So I came out of the military and got pulled into the Pentagon to basically look at these new capabilities and how we stand them up. And so I did that for a number of years, and then started doing commercial work over in the United Kingdom, helping banks secure their systems. Because when you think about cyber, there's offense and defense. And so I spent most of my time on the offense side, and then I really wanted to start applying this to defense side. So I started working at the Pentagon in the late 90s to stand up something called network operations. And then we took some of those concepts and started applying them to the financial services sector as well. I got pulled back in 2006 to the government. And so I spent about almost 3 years there, really, again, doing information technology, cybersecurity, and all those things in my role as a CIO. And then I came out there and went to Bank of America, and then, I went to a hedge fund, and then I wanted to do a couple of startups. So I kind of moved into startup land. But my entire career has really been around cyber, signals intelligence and cyber.
It's a fantastic perspective that you bring. I'm really curious, how has your thinking about cyber strategy changed over the course of your career?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, like I said before, I'd spent time in signals intelligence, electronic warfare, and psychological operations. And this really, if you think about cyber falls in offensive cyber, and to defend against those things, falls into three areas. It's an exploit, which is mean you're trying to go in and still get information, which is what intelligence agencies do. And that's also what cyber criminals try to do. There's attack, right, where you actually are trying to disrupt, degrade, deny a system. And then there's influence, right? So I think all three of those things are part of cyber. What has changed in my career, I'm almost back to the future now, where I think about it the way I thought about it 30 years ago, but through the course of my career, we really focused a lot more on the cyber defense piece, which was protecting information, and then later stopping cyber attacks. But we never really pulled the thread on information operations and, misinformation, disinformation, fraud, which is all kind of part of cyber. And I think even today, CISOs are only given a remit in one or two of those things, not all three.
That's really interesting. When you were CISO at the financial institutions, like BOA, I mean, was fraud part of your mandate, or was that actually not part? Did that not roll up to?
So the short answer is it was and it wasn't, because there's such overlap with kind of classic financial services fraud. And the same thing would go for a hedge fund or anything like this, because you're looking at insider trading and stuff like this. So you kind of found it falling into your remit. And then even disinformation operations, where people setting up alternative websites to whatever company you're trying to protect, making it look like that they are that company that you're trying to protect. And those things don't generally fall under the chief information security officer. They usually fall under whoever does reputation management. That could be risk. It could be marketing. So it's a really weird mosaic of, when you look at those three areas, it touches so many different parts of the organizations. There are people that do fraud, physical security, people that do reputation management. And, I think what I've seen over the years is that we start bringing those things together in a much better way, not necessarily into one person, but in a better way of doing governance and operations.
I think that's in some respects that's the difference between a CISO and a CSO. I mean, my understanding of a CSO is that there's a broader kind of overarching blend of cybersecurity plus physical security. Did you find that as you transitioned from a CISO to a CSO role, did you find that it was in some ways easier because you had more of the estate, and therefore you got some maybe economies of scale, being able to protect the different parts of the organization?
Well, I think when I think about a CSO's role, at least my experience has been, you have cyber, you have personnel security, and you have physical security. And so if you really think about it, if you are trying to defend an organization, all those things have to come together, because attack vectors, usually a lot of them come from the insider threat, right? That's the ability to either convert somebody in classic intelligence, human operations, to actually do something for you, or it's just a malicious insider trying to make money. So, but they're doing it through cyber means. They're trying to send themselves emails, they're trying to move things out to USB. So having those things separate in some ways creates these artificial boundaries where you're not looking at a horizontal threat, right? So I think a lot of this is cutting through the stovepipes. So to me, I found it incredibly useful, because then we can start thinking about security in a totally different way and not just doing technical cybersecurity.
So I'd love to switch gears a little bit and shift from commercial to maybe more nation focused, because you've been the beneficiary of having seen the threat landscape shift from the Cold War to the global war on terror to present day. Has from an outsider's perspective, it seems like cybersecurity has maybe moved from a supporting role to more of the front lines, or certainly at least that's what it seems like from the mainstream news headlines that we read. Has that been the case, or has cyber always been more front and center? It just may not have been visible.
Well, it's evolved quite a bit. I mean, obviously, initially cyber was really about to support intelligence operations, which is to support some about the military operation or national security operation that was going on. I think what's happened is it evolved into just kind of a classic intel thing to an actual warfare thing, where you think about ransomware, which is a denial of getting access to your systems, DDoS attacks, integrity attacks, logic bombs. So there's been a lot of things that have been added to it over the years. And then obviously the big thing over the last 10 years, especially with the rise of social media, is, influence operations. And so I think it's evolved, but in some ways it's kind of always been there, but it's just, we've emphasized more stuff to the right as we've gone through. I think the thing that's probably changed more in terms of just the way you think about it, obviously when you think about military operations, you have a land force, you have a naval force, and you have an air force. And each of those things stood up different services, and they're called domains in DoD. Now you have cyber, which is an actual domain. It's a space, right? And so you have to treat it like a space, just like you treat airspace, this land space or maritime space. And so I think that's what's changed a lot. It's an area in which you're going to compete and fight, just like any other domain.
So taking that same view, I mean, what's something that commercial CISOs who maybe have not had the benefit of government service or military service, what do they not understand about nation state threats when it comes to defending their networks?
Yeah, I think the hard thing is trying to figure out what the motivation is of the nation state. So I always go, whenever you think about an adversary, you think about capabilities and intent, right? And what nation states really bring is usually pretty good capabilities. They have substantial resources to invest and to do things. The thing that's always hard to figure out is the intent. Like, what are they really trying to accomplish? And so capabilities take years and years to build up. Intent can change overnight. So I think the risk is, at least, if you're dealing with a cyber criminal, you know what their intent is. They want to make money. But if you're dealing with a nation state, it may be like a North Korean way of, how do we do fraud and make money? But that could turn into how do we steal information? That could turn into how do we, do an attack against critical infrastructure? So I think the ability to understand the intent and not just focus on capabilities is the hard thing.
That's interesting. I mean, one thing that from a Western perspective is it seems like we do a lot of defense, and sometimes we get it right and sometimes we get it wrong. And so we see news headlines. I mean, you mentioned North Korea. We see news headlines about them taking down movie studios, for instance, or we see news headlines that Chinese APT allegedly have compromised home routers in pre-positioning attacks. Is it the case from your perspective that we do enough offense? Or are we doing it? We just don't see it, or are we actually more on the back foot?
I would say the United States is probably one of the leading cyber capabilities in the world, and so we obviously have a strong offense and a strong defense. So I think if I look at where I think we have gaps, is that we still don't have a uniform way of doing this. So let me unpack that a little bit. As I said before, there's exploit, attack, and influence. That would take probably 15 different agencies to get together on those things. You have Homeland Security, right? That has CISA. You have DoD that's protecting DoD networks, but also have Cyber Command that has its role in all this. You have some elements of the intelligence community that have a role. You have the FBI that has a role to investigate. You have Secret Service that will investigate. You'll have Treasury that will be part of helping set standards and protect, and you have to coordinate with them. In the United States, because we're such a big, complex economy, this thing is very fragmented. And what I'd be fragmented, it's fragmented from a strategy and policy point of view. It's fragmented from a technology and R&D point of view, and it's fragmented from an operations point of view. And I think we constantly get our own way. We can't seem to rationalize the missions.
Well, I think fragmented also from an incentives perspective. I mean, I think a lot about the SEC wanting to look into cyber incidents from publicly traded companies, and their incentives obviously is to try and figure out have companies done everything they needed to do to be safe, which is very different than FBI's mission of trying to make sure that they can go after bad guys, which is different again from the incentive of some of the other agencies. I'm curious if we scale beyond just a single country. I mean, NATO's been in the news quite a bit recently. Do organizations like NATO or like the Five Eyes Alliance, do they still matter when we're talking about the digital domain of cybersecurity in the same way that they mattered for more of a conventional military alliance?
Yeah, I think they matter. They probably matter even more. And so obviously, we have an Air Force, and so NATO has kind of an integrated way of doing Air Force, air defense, and interception operations, bombing, and all that. That's all part of standard military doctrine. You just have to put cyber on top of it. The reason I think cyber is a little bit different is building a bomber, building next generation fighter aircraft takes billions and billions of dollars. Building up cyber capability, a country like Estonia can be a world leader because it's more the intellectual horsepower than it is throwing billions of dollars at trying to design a new, aerodynamic frame or creating new bombs. So the barriers to entry are a lot lower, which I think spells well for NATO because now you have, dozens of countries that can actually bring unique capabilities to this.
So that's interesting. Okay, if we pivot off of that and we stick with the national defense theme, but now we go back into the private sector, I'd love to hear your thoughts around critical infrastructure. Because critical infrastructure mostly privately owned, in most of the Western countries that we're talking about. Should we expect the CEOs as well as the CISOs to act? I mean, effectively as frontline generals in a war, they may or may not be equipped to fight.
Well, I think the short answer is yes. I mean, they have to protect their physical infrastructure. They've always been expected to do that. Now, obviously, if someone tries to rob them, they could pull in the police or the FBI. So there should be a cooperation, public-private partnership cooperation to do this, which we've done again before. There's really nothing new here. I think the challenge with cyber and the public sector and the private sector is that there are so many different standards out there. I know we all get into the cybersecurity framework or, 853, but regulators all like to take those and do because they're special, right? So the NERC and FERC for the energy is going to do their thing. The FFIC and financial services is going to do this. They all take kind of the 853, but then they go, yeah, but we're special, and so we're going to treat it. So if you're in critical infrastructure and you get regulated by 4 different agencies and they all expect slightly different things, and it even gets worse when you get into international, when you get into like Monetary Authority of Singapore, the UK financial authorities, you're chasing around trying to figure out how to get a standard of standards so you can be compliant. And all that is just drain energy and time that you should be spending on how do I do threat modeling? How do I understand where my exposures are? How do I stay on top of that? So I think we've done a real disservice by not creating one standard, having to cascade through all the regulators. Now, we've created a standard, 853 and cybersecurity framework, but it hasn't really cascaded clearly to all the regulators. Even with SEC, you mentioned, it's not clear what does a good standard look like? What's a good standard? If I'd failed to meet that standard, how is it the SEC is going to find me? What is the criteria, right? I know if I build a building and it's not up to code, something happens. I know what that code is. I don't know what it is if I'm answering to the SEC.
It's that theme of fragmentation again.
Yes. It's a lack of a top-down view from the White House going, here's how we're going to do this, get the regulators together. We're all going to adopt this. Here's what think about it this way. I've worked in audit in the past, not because I wanted to, because I had to on some things, but at least when you go audit, there's a standard, right? We have a international standard. Now they vary a little bit, but at least in the United States, we have clear audit, the ways we audit and the criteria that we use. We don't have that for cyber. We don't have measurements. We don't have metrics. So what we get measured on is, do you have multi-factor authentication? Yes. Well, you don't really have it the way we're thinking about it. You should have it this way, right? And so you get this endless variation of chasing the compliance thing. And I think compliance is necessary, but it eats up so much time that we're really not paying attention to buy down risk.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that might be a good segue because I'm hearing notes of relevance to what you're working on with Cybric AI. So, I mean, maybe just walk us through, like, what's the thesis of the company that you're working on today?
Yeah, I think the thesis is this, and I'll go back and just use the some experience. I've been in situations where I've worked in the private sector where, as a CISO, someone would, an executive would read the Financial Times or Economist or New York Times and go, hey, I saw this in the paper today. Are we protected against this? And so it would be some variation of ransomware that hit something. And, I'd go, well, we have all these controls. Here's how we do it. And here's our operation. So I basically found a way to talk around it because I could never directly answer that question. And so what had always bugged me was, how do I really understand my cybersecurity posture at any given moment, right? But historically, what I've done, I would hire a Deloitte or a Booz Allen or E&Y to come in. They do a risk and vulnerability assessment. They do a control assessment, and they'd, do some threat modeling, and we get a deck. And 6 months later, I'd have a really good story, but it's 6 months old, and it cost me a lot of money, and and it only covered a fraction of my IT assets. And so, I think we struggle a little bit. This goes back to the cybersecurity framework. The way the framework works, and frameworks matter because they sit a mental model and they sit the compliance model that I talked about. But right now it's, governance, it's identify your risk, and then it's protect, building the controls. But then they go is detect, respond, recover. Once you get down to cyber operations. And I think what's missing is the preventative piece of this, which is, how do I bring in threat intelligence? How do I understand my vulnerabilities and exposures and pull all that together? So I call it, in the military, we call this being left to boom, meaning don't wait until you detect something and respond to it. Get ahead of it, try to anticipate what's going on. We do this a little bit with red teams, purple teams and stuff like this, but we really haven't invested in it or institutionalized in such a way and automated in such a way that it scales. And so that's the problem that we're trying to tackle with this. And we're not alone. There's other companies that are trying to take this thing on, but it's really how to get better preventing attacks than detecting and responding. And my last point of this is that the analogy I use is that you have a house, you have smoke detectors, you have heat detectors, you have fire extinguishers, you're tied into an alarm to alert the fire department if your house catches on fire. You have insurance to help pay for any damage, but you don't spend much time walking around the house going, why do I have an open can of gasoline here next to electrical outlet and flame, right? And so we do a great job at detecting and responding. We don't do such a good job at preparing and preventing. So I think this is really about preventative security as you go forward. I think that's what I think we as an industry are missing. Now, the good news is I think people are waking up to it and they're catching up.
That's fantastic. Patrick, if people want to check out more or find out more about the company, where can they go?
Well, you can go to www.cynomic, CYNOMIQ.ai.
Amazing. Patrick, it's always been a pleasure speaking with you. And this time, at least, other people will benefit from the conversation other than just myself. So it's a pleasure.
Great. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Code and Country.